I, 32, F, stood between the two small headstones, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. My daughter, Maya, who was 6, squeezed my right hand. My son, Leo, who was 8, held my left. It had been 1 year since the accident that took both my parents. 1 year of navigating a world that felt fundamentally tilted, a landscape I no longer recognized. The grief was a constant, a low hum beneath the surface of my days. But here, at their final resting place, it was a roar. We had come to lay fresh flowers, a small ritual we had started to mark the passing of the seasons without them. Maya had picked out the yellow tulips. Leo had insisted on the white roses, just like the ones Grandma used to grow in her garden. I was just telling them a story about their grandfather, about the time he tried to build a kite that ended up stuck in the tallest tree in the neighborhood, when I heard the crunch of gravel on the path behind me. I assumed it was another family visiting a loved one, a shared moment of quiet remembrance. I did not turn around. I wanted to keep this moment pure for my children, for my parents. The sound stopped a few feet away. A man cleared his throat. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat, a sound that had once meant comfort, and now only meant trouble. I squeezed my children's hands tighter.
"Sarah," he said.
I closed my eyes for a second, a silent plea to the universe to make him a figment of my imagination. But when I opened them, he was still there. My ex-husband, Mark. And he was not alone. Standing beside him, with a proprietary hand on his arm, was Clara, his new wife. The woman he had left me for just 2 months before my parents died. Her expression was a careful mask of sympathy, but her eyes held a glint of something else. Triumph. My first instinct was to shield my children, to pull them behind me as if protecting them from a wild animal. Leo's grip on my hand tightened, his small body tense. Maya just stared, her lower lip trembling slightly. She did not understand the complexities, but she understood tension. She knew the man who was once her father now felt like a stranger. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I asked. My voice was low and steady, a feat of control I did not know I possessed. "We came to pay our respects," he said, gesturing vaguely at the headstones. "They were my family too for a long time." Clara nodded, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch in the wind. "We just wanted to show our support, Sarah. We know how hard this day must be for you." The condescension in her voice was like sandpaper on my raw nerves. Support. They thought this was support. This intrusion, this violation of the one place on earth that felt sacred to me and my children. My parents had despised Mark after he left. They had tolerated Clara for my sake during the brief period of overlap, but my mother had once told me, in a quiet moment, that Clara had hungry eyes. I finally understood what she meant. They were hungry for my life, for my past, for anything they could claim as their own. "This is not the time or the place," I said, turning my body slightly to block their view of the graves. "You are not welcome here." Mark's face hardened. The faux concern melted away, replaced by the familiar frustration he always showed when I did not bend to his will. "Don't be like that, Sarah. We have a right to be here. I loved your parents. You have no rights here," I said, my voice gaining an edge. "You forfeited them. Both of you." Clara stepped forward, her smile thin and sharp. "We were just trying to be decent. There is no need for such hostility. We are all adults." I looked at her, then back at Mark. He would not meet my gaze. He was looking at the names carved into the granite, as if trying to will a connection that no longer existed. He was performing grief, and he had brought an audience. It was sickening. I felt a surge of anger, so hot it almost made me dizzy. This was not about my parents. This was about him. It was always about him. He needed to be seen as the good guy, the caring ex-husband, even as he stood there with the woman who had helped him shatter our family. "Leave," I said. It was not a request. It was a command. Leo, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Go away," he said, his small voice filled with a surprising amount of venom. "You made Mom cry." Mark flinched as if struck. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, And for a moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been shame. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a defensive anger. "That's not fair, Leo," he said. "Your mother and I are just talking." "We are not talking," I corrected him. "I am telling you to leave my family alone."
Now.
Clara placed a soothing hand on Mark's arm. "Come on, darling." We tried. "She is obviously not in a place to accept our kindness," she turned to me, her eyes cold. "We will just leave the flowers and go." She was holding a bouquet of expensive, store-bought lilies, their smell cloying and artificial. It was an insult to the simple, heartfelt tulips and roses my children and I had brought. It was a display. A performance for an audience of ghosts. "Don't," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't you dare leave those here." I felt a line being crossed, a final boundary being stomped on with cruel indifference. This was my space to grieve. This was my children's space to remember their grandparents. And they were turning it into a stage for their own drama, their own twisted narrative of magnanimity. This moment, this violation, was the spark. It was the thing that burned away the fog of my grief and replaced it with a cold, hard clarity. Something was wrong. Not just emotionally wrong, but deeply, structurally wrong. And I had a sickening feeling that it had everything to do with the man standing in front of me. He hesitated, looking from me to Clara. For a moment he seemed torn. But as always, he chose her. He chose the new life, the easier path. He nodded curtly, turned his back on me and his children, and walked away. Clara gave me one last look, a small, smug smile playing on her lips, before following him down the path. They got into his sleek, new car, a car I knew he could not afford on a salary alone, and drove away, leaving behind only the lingering, cheap scent of their lilies and a profound sense of desecration. I stood there for a long time after they were gone, holding my children's hands. The wind died down, and the silence of the cemetery settled around us again. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was heavier. Maya finally broke it. "Why was Daddy here with her, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small. "I don't know, sweetie," I said, kneeling down to look her in the eyes. "But we are not going to let them ruin our day with Grandma and Grandpa, are we?" She shook her head, but her eyes were still troubled. Leo was quiet, his face set in a grim expression that was far too old for an 8-year-old. He was more like my father than I ever realized. He saw things. He understood injustice. As I drove us home, the image of Mark and Clara at the cemetery played over and over in my mind. It was not just their presence that bothered me. It was their confidence. Their air of ownership. Mark had always been entitled, but this was different. It felt like he believed he had a genuine claim to my parents' memory, to their legacy. And then there was the car. The expensive clothes Clara was wearing. The casual way they spoke of support, as if they had resources to spare. When we got back to the house my parents had left me, I put the kids in front of the television with some snacks. I needed a moment to think. I went into my father's old study. It was the one room I had not changed. His books were still on the shelves, his favorite pens still on the desk. He had been a meticulous man, a planner. He and my mother had worked hard their whole lives to build a comfortable life and to ensure that my children and I would be taken care of after they were gone. They had set up trusts, investments, a clear and detailed will. My father had walked me through it all years ago. "So you're never dependent on anyone, Sarah," he had said, looking pointedly at Mark, who had been in the other room at the time. Mark had been involved in helping my father with his finances in the last year of his life, after my father's first heart attack made it difficult for him to manage the paperwork. Mark had offered to help, and at the time, I had seen it as a kind gesture. My father had been suspicious, but his health was failing, and he had reluctantly agreed to let Mark organize statements and communicate with their financial advisor. We were still married then, though the cracks were beginning to show. Now, thinking back on it, a cold dread began to creep up my spine. I sat down at the heavy oak desk and pulled out the folder my father had labeled estate. It contained copies of the will, trust documents, and a list of all their assets. I had glanced at it after they passed, but I had been too overwhelmed with grief to do a deep dive. The family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had assured me everything was in order and that the probate process was straightforward. He said it would take some time, but that my parents had left a substantial nest egg for me and the children. I started going through the papers, my hands shaking slightly. Everything seemed to be there. The will clearly stated that I was the sole heir to their property and assets, with everything to be placed in a trust for my benefit and for the future of my children. I saw the names of the banks, the investment firms, the account numbers. It all looked as I remembered. But then I found a note my father had scribbled on a separate piece of paper, tucked inside the main trust document. It listed a specific portfolio, a significant one, managed by a different firm, a smaller, local one he had trusted for decades. I looked through the official asset list again. That portfolio was not on it. My heart began to pound in my chest. It was possible it had been consolidated with the other investments. It was possible my father had closed the account before he passed. There could be 100 logical explanations. But the cold feeling in my gut told me it was none of them. The image of Mark's new car, of Clara's expensive coat, flashed in my mind again. I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Henderson's number. It was a Saturday, but he had given me his cell for emergencies. He answered on the third ring, his voice warm and kind. "Sarah, is everything all right?" he asked. "I hope so, Mr. Henderson," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I have a question about my parents' estate. I was looking through the documents, and I found a note my father made about an investment portfolio with Sterling and Finch. I don't see it on the official list of assets you sent over. Do you know anything about it?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was just a second too long. "Sterling and Finch," he repeated slowly. "Yes, I remember that one. It was quite a significant part of their holdings. Your father was very proud of how well it had performed over the years." "So, where is it?" I asked, my voice getting tight. "Why isn't it in the probate documents?" "Well," he said, and his voice became hesitant, cautious. "According to my records, that account was closed about 6 months before your parents passed away. The funds were transferred out." "Transferred where?" I demanded. "My parents didn't tell me they were moving that money." "I don't have the details of the destination account, Sarah," he said gently. "The request was made through a power of attorney document that your father had on file. The signature on the transfer request was legitimate. As I recall, it was Mark who handled that particular transaction. He brought the paperwork in for your father to sign." My blood ran cold.
Mark.
He had been the one. My father had been so ill during that time. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold a pen. He had trusted Mark to help him. He had trusted his son-in-law. "Mark handled it," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I felt a wave of nausea. The scene at the cemetery suddenly clicked into place. Their arrogance, their confidence. It was not just emotional cruelty. It was the audacity of a thief who had returned to the scene of the crime. "Sarah, are you there?" Mr. Henderson asked, concern in his voice. "Yes," I said, my mind racing. "Yes, I'm here. Mr. Henderson, I need you to find out where that money went. I need to know everything about that transfer. I need to see the paperwork, the signature, everything." "Of course," he said, his tone shifting from gentle to serious. "I'll start on Monday morning. I'll need to contact Sterling and Finch directly. But Sarah, if the power of attorney was valid and the signature was your father's, it may have been a legitimate transfer. Perhaps he intended to give Mark a gift, or—" "No." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "My father would never have done that. Not without telling me. He did not trust Mark with $5, let alone a 6-figure portfolio. Something is wrong here. Very wrong." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling so hard I could barely place the receiver back in its cradle. I looked around the study, at the photos on the wall. My parents on their wedding day. Me and my brother as kids. My own wedding photo, with Mark. I felt a sudden, violent urge to rip it from the wall and smash it to pieces. He had not just betrayed me. He had betrayed them. He had stolen from my grieving family. He had used my father's illness as an opportunity. And Clara. She had to have known. That smug smile at the cemetery was not just the smile of a woman who had won the man. It was the smile of a co-conspirator. They were living a lavish life on my parents' money. My children's inheritance. The money my father had worked his entire life to save, to ensure his daughter and grandchildren would be safe. The grief I had been carrying for a year transformed in that moment. It did not disappear, but it crystallized. It turned from a heavy, suffocating blanket into a sharp, pointed weapon. The sadness was still there, but now it was fueled by a white-hot rage. He had underestimated me. They both had. They thought I was just a heartbroken widow's daughter, too lost in my sorrow to notice what they had done. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I was not just my parents' daughter. I was my father's daughter. And my father never, ever let a thief get away with it. My quiet investigation began that very night. I started by trying to talk to Mark directly. I knew it was a long shot, but I needed to see his reaction, to gauge his lies. I called him the next day, a Sunday. I told him I needed to talk about something important regarding this estate and asked if I could come over. He sounded wary but agreed. Clara, of course, answered the door when I arrived. She stood there in a silk robe, looking like she had just stepped out of a spa. Their apartment was new, in a luxury building downtown that I knew was far beyond Mark's means. The minimalist decor was all her taste, cold and impersonal. Sarah, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What a surprise.
Come in.
Mark was sitting on a large, white leather sofa, scrolling through his phone. He did not get up. What's this about? He asked, not looking at me. I decided to start gently, to test the waters. I was going through some of Dad's old papers, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I found a note about his Sterling and Finch portfolio. I was just wondering what happened with it. I can't seem to find any recent statements. I watched him carefully. He froze for a split second, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. He recovered quickly, putting the phone down and looking at me with a practiced expression of nonchalance. Oh, that, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Your dad closed that account. He decided to move the money into something with a better return. It was all very complicated, a lot of tax stuff. He asked me to handle the paperwork. I see, I said. Where did he move it to? Mr. Henderson doesn't seem to have any record of a new account being opened. This time, Clara stepped in. Honestly, Sarah, are you grilling him? Mark did your father a huge favor. That paperwork was a nightmare. You should be thanking him for taking that burden off your parents' shoulders when your father was so sick. Her defensiveness was a blaring alarm. She was protecting him, building a wall around his lie. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that she was in on it. I'm not grilling him, Clara, I said, my gaze fixed on Mark. I'm just trying to understand where my father's money is. It was a significant amount. It seems strange that there's no paper trail. The trail is there if you know where to look, Mark said, his voice becoming hostile. It was all rolled into the main fund. It's all part of the estate you're getting. You don't need to worry. Everything is accounted for. He was lying. I knew he was lying, and he knew I knew. It was a silent battle of wills across their expensive, sterile living room. I saw the panic flickering in his eyes, the fear that his comfortable new life was under threat. So, you're saying the value of the main fund should reflect the addition of the Sterling and Finch money? I pressed, because from what I can see, the total value of the estate is exactly what my father told me it was before that portfolio was ever touched. He stood up then, his face flushed with anger. What are you implying, Sarah? That I stole from your father? After everything I did for him? I spent weeks helping him sort out his affairs while you were busy falling apart. The cruelty of his words was meant to wound me, to throw me off balance. A year ago, it would have worked. I would have dissolved into tears, apologizing for even asking. But not anymore. His insult was a gift. It solidified my resolve. I am not falling apart, I thought. I am putting myself back together, and you are the first piece of trash I am sweeping away. I'm not implying anything, Mark, I said calmly, standing up to leave. I'm just asking questions. And I'll keep asking them until I get a real answer. I turned and walked out of the apartment without another word, leaving them standing in the middle of their stolen luxury. As I walked down the pristine hallway, I could hear their muffled, angry voices erupting behind the closed door. I had rattled the cage. Now it was time to find the key to unlock it. The next morning, I was on the phone with Mr. Henderson. He's lying, I said, after recounting the conversation. He and his new wife are living on that money. I'm sure of it. I agree that his story doesn't add up, Sarah, Mr. Henderson said. I've already put in a formal request with Sterling and Finch for all documentation related to the account closure. They are legally obligated to provide it to the executor of the estate, which is you. It will take a few days, but we will get the transfer records. A few days felt like an eternity. I needed to do something more. I decided to dig deeper into my father's records myself. I spent the next 2 days in his study, going through every file cabinet, every desk drawer, every box of old papers. I was looking for anything related to Mark's involvement with their finances. My mother had been a pack rat. She never threw anything away. I was counting on that. Late on the second night, I found it. It was in a box labeled Old Bills, tucked away in the back of a closet. It was a small, leather-bound notebook. My father's daily journal. He had not written in it every day, but he used it to jot down important thoughts, reminders, and appointments. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. His familiar, spidery handwriting filled the pages. I found the entries from the months leading up to his death. I read about his declining health, his frustration with his weakening body. And then I found the entries about Mark. At first, they were neutral. Mark came by to help with the bank statements. Mark is taking the tax forms to the accountant, but then the tone began to change. One entry read, Mark is pushing about the Sterling and Finch account. Says it's underperforming. I don't believe him. Called John Sterling myself. He says the fund is doing better than ever. Why would the boy lie? My breath caught in my throat. My father had known. He had suspected. I kept reading, my hands shaking. A few pages later, another entry. Mark brought a document today. A transfer request. Said it was to move the S&F money to a higher yield fund he found. I told him I wanted to talk to Henderson first. He got angry. Said I didn't trust him. He pushed the pen into my hand. My hand was shaking so badly. I don't remember signing it, but the paper is gone. He took it with him. I feel uneasy. Very uneasy. This was it. This was the proof. My father had not wanted to sign that paper. Mark had pressured him, had taken advantage of his physical weakness and his confusion. It was not a forgery in the legal sense, perhaps, but it was coercion. It was theft by manipulation. The final, gut-wrenching entry on the subject was dated 2 days later. Called Mark to ask for the documents for the new fund. He said he would bring them next week. He sounded strange, evasive. I think I made a terrible mistake. I have to tell Sarah. But he never got the chance. He had his second, fatal heart attack the next day. My mother, heartbroken and lost, followed him 2 weeks later. The thought that this stress, this betrayal, might have contributed to my father's death was a new and unbearable layer of pain. Mark had not just stolen their money. He may have stolen my last days with my father. The rage was so intense now it was a physical thing. It was a cold, hard stone in my chest. I took the journal and placed it carefully in my purse. This was not just about getting the money back anymore. This was about justice. For my father. For my mother. For my children. The next day, Mr. Henderson called. Sarah, I have the records from Sterling and Finch, he said, his voice grim. You were right. The money was not rolled into any of your parents' other accounts. It was transferred to a newly opened joint account. The names on the account are Mark and Clara. There it was. The final, undeniable confirmation. The missing piece. So we have him, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. We have him, Mr. Henderson confirmed. We have a clear case of financial elder abuse and fraudulent conversion of assets. The power of attorney your father gave him was for managing existing affairs. not for liquidating assets for his own benefit. Especially not when it went against your father's known intentions. And that journal you found, that is devastating. It establishes your father's state of mind and Mark's undue influence. We can proceed both civilly to recover the funds and criminally if you so choose. I thought for a moment. A criminal trial would be long and messy. It would drag my children through more ugliness. But a civil suit would recover the money and expose him. That felt like enough. More than enough. But I did not want to just file a lawsuit. That felt too impersonal. Too clean. He had made this personal. He had violated my family in the most intimate way. He deserved a personal reckoning. I want to do one more thing before we file the papers, I told Mr. Henderson. I want to confront him. I want him to know that I know. I want to see his face when his world comes crashing down. Mr. Henderson was hesitant. Sarah, that might not be the wisest course of action. He could try to hide the money, or... He already thinks the money is hidden, I interrupted. He thinks he got away with it. I'm not going to give him a chance to move it. I'm going to do this my way. Can you have the lawsuit ready to file the moment I give you the word?
Of course, he said.
Just be careful. I knew exactly how I was going to do it. Mark's parents, Robert and Carol, were hosting their annual family dinner that weekend. They had, to my surprise, continued to invite me and the children even after the divorce, out of a sense of loyalty to their grandchildren. I usually declined, but this time I accepted. I told Carol that I felt it was important for the children to maintain a connection with their family. She was thrilled. Mark and Clara would be there. It was the perfect stage. A captive audience of the people whose opinion Mark valued most. The people he had been performing for all along. The day of the dinner, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anger was still there, but it was focused.
It was a tool.
I dressed carefully, not in morning clothes, but in a simple, elegant dress my mother had loved. I wanted to look strong. I wanted to look like her daughter. I picked up my father's journal and the copies of the bank transfer records Mr. Henderson had emailed me and put them in my purse. When we arrived, the house was filled with the usual cheerful chaos of a family gathering. Mark's aunts, uncles, and cousins were all there. Robert and Carol greeted me and the children with warm hugs. They were good people, blinded by their love for their son. They had no idea what he was capable of. I saw Mark and Clara across the room. They were holding court, laughing and telling a story. Clara was wearing a diamond necklace I had never seen before. It probably cost more than my car. When Mark saw me, his smile faltered for a moment. He looked surprised and then wary. Clara just gave me a tight, condescending smile. I spent the first hour of the party letting the kids play with their cousins, making small talk with the relatives. I was patient. I waited for the right moment. It came after dinner, when everyone had gathered in the living room with coffee and dessert. Robert, Mark's father, stood up to make his traditional toast. He talked about the importance of family, of sticking together through thick and thin. He looked over at Mark and Clara with pride. "And I want to say how proud I am of my son, Mark," Robert said, raising his glass. "He has had a tough year, but he has handled it with grace. And he was a wonderful support to Sarah's parents in their final days. A true son to them." This was my opening. The hypocrisy was so thick, I could barely breathe. I let the silence after the toast settle for a moment. Then I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. "That's a lovely sentiment, Robert," I said, getting to my feet. "But I think you've been misinformed about the kind of support Mark provided to my parents." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me. I could feel Mark's eyes burning into me. Clara's smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure fury. "Sarah, what is the meaning of this?" Carol asked, her face a mixture of confusion and alarm. "I think it's time for some honesty," I said, my voice steady. "Mark, you told me that my father willingly closed his Sterling and Finch account and that the money was rolled into the main estate. Is that correct?" Mark stood up, his face pale. "This is not the time or the place for this," he hissed. "I think it's the perfect time and place," I replied, my voice getting stronger. Your father just toasted you for being a true son to my parents. Let's all find out what that really means. So, tell us all. Is that what happened? He looked around the room at the expectant faces of his family.
He was trapped.
Yes, he said through gritted teeth. That's what happened. Your father wanted me to handle it. That's interesting, I said, pulling my father's journal from my purse. Because my father wrote something very different in his journal. I opened it to the bookmarked page. He wrote, Mark is pushing about the Sterling and Finch account. Says it's underperforming. I don't believe him. Why would the boy lie? A collective gasp went through the room. Robert took a step forward. What is that, Sarah? This is my father's journal, Robert, I said, holding it up. And it gets worse. I read the next entry, my voice ringing with the injustice of it all. He wrote about how Mark pressured him to sign the transfer papers, how he was sick and his hand was shaking, how he wrote, I think I made a terrible mistake. I have to tell Sarah, but he never got the chance, did he, Mark? Because he died 2 days later. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Carol's choked sob. Mark looked like he had been turned to stone. His face was ashen. That's a lie. Clara shrieked, finding her voice. She's making it up. She's bitter and jealous. Am I said, turning my cold gaze on her. I pulled the bank records from my purse. Then perhaps you can explain this. This is the official record of the transfer from my father's account. And this is the record of the deposit. A sum of over $800,000 deposited into a brand new joint account. An account in the names of Mark and Clara. I let the papers drop onto the coffee table in the center of the room. The truth lay there, stark and undeniable, in black and white. Robert walked slowly to the table and picked up the papers. He read them, his face growing darker with every line. Carol was openly weeping now, her hand over her mouth. Mark, Robert said, his voice a low growl. Is this true? Mark did not answer. He could not. He just stood there, his lies stripped away, exposed in front of everyone he had spent his life trying to impress. He looked from his father's furious face to his mother's devastated one. He looked at his aunts and uncles, who were staring at him with expressions of disgust and disbelief. You stole from a dying man, Robert said, his voice shaking with rage. You stole from your own children's grandparents. Clara tried one last time. It was a gift. He wanted us to have it. He loved Mark like a son. My father wrote in his journal that he did not trust your husband, I said, my voice like ice. He knew Mark was lying. And you, Clara, you spent the money, didn't you? The new apartment, the car, that necklace you're wearing. You're living on my children's inheritance. Her face crumpled. The smugness, the confidence, it all evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, grasping fear. She knew it was over. And then, Mark did something I never expected. His whole body seemed to collapse in on itself. The arrogance, the defiance, it all drained away. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a monster, but a weak, pathetic man who had been caught. His eyes filled with tears of self-pity. And then, slowly, he sank to his knees in the middle of his parents' living room. He dropped his head into his hands and began to sob, not with remorse, but with the despair of a man who had lost everything. I looked down at him, this man I had once loved, this man who had fathered my children. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, not even anger anymore. Just a vast, empty coldness. He was a stranger. I've already spoken to my lawyer, Mark, I said, my voice clear and final. A lawsuit is being filed tomorrow to recover every single cent you stole. And Robert, Carol, I said, turning to his parents, I am so sorry you had to find out like this. But you deserve to know the truth about your son. I turned and gathered my children, who had been watching from the doorway with wide, confused eyes. I knelt down in front of them. Come on, sweethearts, I said softly. It's time to go home. I walked out of that house without looking back, my children's hands held tightly in mine. I left behind the wreckage of a family, the sound of Mark's pathetic sobs, and the shattered illusions of everyone in that room. The fight was not over, but the war was won. I had taken back my power. I had honored my parents. And I had secured my children's future. As we drove away, I felt the heavy weight of the past year begin to lift. It was not gone, but it was no longer crushing me. It was just a part of my story now, a chapter that was finally, blessedly, over. The road ahead was my own, and for the first time in a long time, it felt bright. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Mr. Henderson filed the civil suit as promised. Faced with the mountain of evidence, including my father's journal and the irrefutable bank records, Mark and Clara had no choice but to capitulate. Their lawyer advised them to settle immediately to avoid a public trial and the possibility of criminal charges, which Mr. Henderson had made clear were still on the table. The settlement agreement was swift and brutal. They were forced to liquidate all their assets. The new apartment was sold. The fancy car was repossessed. Clara's jewelry, including the diamond necklace, was appraised and its value turned over to the estate. They had to drain their own bank accounts to repay the full amount, plus interest and all of my legal fees. They were left with practically nothing. I had a few brief, transactional conversations with Mark's mother, Carol, during this time. The first one was a week after the disastrous family dinner. She called me, her voice thick with tears. "Sarah, I don't know what to say," she began. "You don't have to say anything, Carol," I told her, my voice gentle but firm. "This isn't your fault." "But it is," she sobbed. "We raised him. We should have seen it. Robert is so ashamed. He can barely leave the house. He hasn't spoken a word to Mark since that night." I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was a victim in this too, her family torn apart by her son's greed. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said, and I meant it. But this was his choice. He has to face the consequences. "I know," she whispered. I want you to know, we will make sure the children are always taken care of. We're setting up a separate trust for them from our own money. We don't want them to ever suffer because of what their father did." It was a kind gesture, and I thanked her for it. But I also made it clear that my children were now my sole responsibility, and that while I appreciated their love for them, all future contact would be on my terms. I needed to establish clear boundaries to protect my kids from any more of the family's toxicity. I also had a conversation with my best friend, Lisa. I met her for coffee after the settlement was finalized. I told her everything that had happened, from the cemetery to the confrontation at the dinner. She listened intently, her eyes wide. When I finished, she just shook her head in disbelief. "Wow, Sarah."
Just wow.
I knew he was a jerk, but I never imagined he was a monster. "He wasn't a monster," I said, stirring my coffee. "He was just weak. And greedy. And he thought I was weaker than he was. That was his mistake." "I am so incredibly proud of you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You fought back. You took him down. You did it for your parents and for your kids." "I did it for me, too," I admitted. I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I didn't need him or anyone else to protect me. The final piece of fallout came from an unexpected source. About a month after everything was settled, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Clara. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The letter was short and surprisingly direct. She wrote that she had left Mark. She said that she had believed his lies, that he had told her my father had given them the money as a wedding gift. She claimed she had no idea it was stolen until I revealed the truth at the dinner. She said she was ashamed and sorry for her part in it, especially for her behavior at the cemetery. She did not ask for my forgiveness. She just stated that she was trying to start her life over and that she wished me and my children well. I did not know if I believed her. It was possible she was just as much a victim of Mark's manipulation as I was. It was also possible she was a master liar, trying to salvage her own reputation. In the end, it did not matter. Her fate was no longer tied to mine. I folded the letter and put it away. She was a part of the chapter that was closed. Life began to settle into a new, peaceful rhythm. With the inheritance restored, I was able to pay off the mortgage on my parents' house, invest for my children's future, and set up my own small business, a dream I had put on hold for years. The house that had once felt heavy with grief now felt like a sanctuary, a legacy of my parents' love that I was able to preserve. I made sure my children were okay. I found a good therapist for Leo to help him process his anger and confusion towards his father. Maya, being younger, bounced back more quickly, content in the stable, loving environment I created for us. We continued our visits to my parents' graveside, but the memories were no longer tainted. It was our special place again, a place of peace and connection. I saw Mark one last time, about a year later. I was at the grocery store with the kids. I turned a corner, and there he was in the cereal aisle. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his clothes were shabby, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was alone. He saw me and froze. His eyes darted to Leo and Maya, and I saw a flicker of deep, profound loss in his expression. For a moment, I thought he might approach us. But then he seemed to shrink into himself. He looked down at the floor, ashamed. He turned his cart around and quickly walked away, disappearing down another aisle. Leo looked up at me. "Was that Dad?" he asked. "Yes, honey, it was," I said.
"He looks sad," Maya said.
"Yes, he does," I agreed. And in that moment, I realized the coldness I had felt towards him had finally thawed, leaving not forgiveness, but a kind of detached pity. He had built his life on a foundation of lies, and now he was living in the rubble. He had lost his wife, his family's respect, his ill-gotten wealth, and most importantly, he had lost his children. He had everything, and now he had nothing. I, on the other hand, had thought I had lost everything, but I had found my strength. I had my children, my home, my future. I had my parents' memory, untarnished and honored. As I pushed the cart towards the checkout, with Maya chattering about her favorite cereal and Leo holding my hand, I felt a deep sense of peace. He had not learned his lesson because I had taught it to him. He had learned it because he had been forced to live with the empty space where his life used to be. He finally learned what it feels like to have nothing left but shame. And I had learned what it felt like to be truly, completely free. The journey from that cold day at the cemetery to this moment of quiet contentment in a grocery store had been long and arduous. It had forced me to confront the deepest betrayal and my own capacity for anger and retribution. In the beginning, my actions were fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. I wanted to see him suffer, as he had made my family suffer. I wanted to strip him of the smug satisfaction I saw on his face that day. The confrontation in his parents' living room was the culmination of that rage, a carefully orchestrated piece of theater designed for maximum humiliation. And it had worked. The image of him on his knees, broken and exposed, was seared into my memory. For a time, that memory brought me a grim sense of satisfaction. It felt like justice. But as the dust settled and the legal machinery did its work, the rage began to subside. It was replaced by something quieter, more profound. The process of meticulously uncovering his deceit, of working with Mr. Henderson, of poring over my father's papers, was more than just a quest for revenge. It was a process of reclaiming my own story. For so long, my life had been defined by my relationship with Mark. I was Mark's wife, then Mark's ex-wife. My grief was colored by his betrayal. My future felt uncertain because of his actions. By taking control of the situation, I was no longer a passive victim of his narrative. I was the author of my own. My conversations with Carol, Mark's mother, continued sporadically. They were strained at first, but over time, they found a new, more honest footing. She never made excuses for her son, but she did share stories of his childhood, of the insecurities and the desperate need for approval that had driven him his whole life. It did not excuse what he did, not by a long shot, but it painted a picture of a man who was fundamentally hollow, always trying to fill a void with external validation and material possessions. He had seen my parents' money not just as a means to an end, but as a symbol of the success and status he craved. He had probably convinced himself that he was entitled to it, that he deserved it more than I did. One day, about 2 years after the confrontation, Carol called me. "Mark is in therapy, Sarah," she told me, her voice tentative. He's trying to understand why he did what he did. His therapist thinks it would be good for him to apologize to you. Not to ask for forgiveness, but just to acknowledge the harm he caused." I was silent for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say no, to deny him even that small piece of closure. Why should I help him feel better about himself? But then I thought of Leo and Maya. They deserved to have a father who was, if not a good man, at least a man who was trying to be better. "Okay," I said finally. "He can write me a letter. I'll read it. That's all I can promise." The letter arrived a week later. It was handwritten, the script shaky and unfamiliar. It was long and rambling, full of therapeutic jargon about shame and accountability. But buried in all the self-analysis were a few simple, powerful sentences. "I stole from your parents. I betrayed your trust. I lied to you and to our children. I am sorry for the pain I caused. I know I can never fix it, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be a man our children are not ashamed of." I read the letter, and I did not feel anger, or pity, or even satisfaction. I just felt nothing. It was like reading an apology from a stranger about a historical event. The harm had been done, the consequences had been meted out, and my life had moved on. His apology was for him, not for me. I put the letter away and did not reply. My silence was its own answer. He did, however, start to make small, tentative efforts to be a father again. He paid his child support on time, every time. He sent birthday cards. He asked, through his mother, if he could see the children. After much thought, I agreed to supervise visits at a neutral location like a park or a museum. The first few meetings were awkward. Leo was sullen and suspicious. Maya was shy. Mark was nervous, a shadow of the confident, arrogant man he used to be. But he kept showing up. He was patient. He did not push. He just was there. He answered their questions honestly when they asked. He apologized to them directly, in simple terms they could understand. Slowly, very slowly, things began to thaw. Leo started talking to him about school. Maya showed him her drawings. It was not the relationship they would have had if none of this had ever happened. It was a new relationship, built on a fragile foundation of remorse and a child's capacity for forgiveness. I never tried to influence them one way or the other. Their relationship with their father was their own to navigate. My only job was to ensure they were safe and emotionally supported. My own life blossomed in ways I never could have imagined. My business grew, and I found a deep sense of fulfillment in my work. I made new friends. I even started dating again, cautiously at first, but eventually I met a man who was kind and steady, a man who respected my independence and loved my children as his own. My life was full. The memory of that day at the cemetery never completely faded. It remained a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, of the darkness that can hide behind a familiar face. But it no longer had the power to hurt me. It was just a scar, a reminder of a wound that had healed. Sometimes when I visit my parents' graves, I think about Mark and Clara showing up that day. I think about the rage and violation I felt. And I realize now that their intrusion, as painful as it was a gift. It was the catalyst that woke me from my grief-stricken slumber. It forced me to fight, to uncover the truth, and in doing so, to find my own strength. They came to my parents' graveside to assert their power, to stake a claim on a life that was not theirs. But in the end, all they did was hand me the key to my own liberation. They thought they were closing a chapter on me, leaving me behind with nothing. But what they really did was force me to start a new one. A better one. And for that, in a strange and twisted way, I will always be grateful. The story I tell my children about their grandparents is not one of tragedy and betrayal. It is a story of love, resilience, and the enduring strength of family. A legacy Mark tried and failed to steal. A legacy that I will protect and nurture for the rest of my days.